Amy just taught us about to show whether we are okay with that or not. If there is anyone who's not okay with these being made public and you want to have a discussion about that now, we can also open up for that. Great. Not hearing any dissent at this moment, Amy, I think that we're okay with making the recording of these meetings public.
Sounds great. Thank you all. We will have a YouTube link, and I'll make sure that I send that out to you all so that if you want to forward that on to any community members that you know would be interested in seeing this. Mary Lou, can you also pull Marian and Corrine into panelists, please?
I also wanted to acknowledge today the request that I heard clearly for a process around developing shared language, policy mapping, and to form a racial justice analysis from which we work from. And each of us come to this work with our own personal and professional learning for racial justice. It is, in fact, why we are all here. And we may arrive here with differing views on the values and principles that guide our work. And we want to create space for sharing of ideas that inform the frameworks we each operate within. I think as Adrienne Maree Brown teaches in her book, Emergent Strategy, everyone should be able to be themselves and move their agendas in this space. And so we are all here because of our commitment to racial justice. It has been expressed both here at the Central Committee and in the subcommittees, the desire to share terms and definitions, books, articles, podcasts, and other resources that have been meaningful in guiding your work or are relevant and may inform the topics we're discussing on the council. And so those can be submitted to Amy, and she will pull them all together and send out for us all to use to better understand the framework that others are coming from. So I hope that that provides an avenue for us to begin sharing in those ways. We're going to now move to report outs of our subcommittees, which met last Thursday for the first time. And I think, Amy, should we start with education?
Yes, that'll be good. Before you do that, Mary Lou, can you please bring in Senator Lopez in as a panelist? And so, Tammy, are you education?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So Tammy's going to give us an overview of the education subcommittee meeting.
Okay, so we met last Thursday, and we talked about a lot of things. First, let's start with the priority areas. One of the priority areas that we had talked about was the Senate Bill 90 and the 2020 version. I know that Senator Lopez, that we are requesting some information from her as to what I guess the latest version, so that we can go through that and start working with her on that bill. We wanted to go back and get the original documents and not the shaved version to see what is there, so that we can do some type of analysis and policy analysis to see what we can do and how we can move that forward. I know we had also talked about potential anti-racism bills that were also out there, and see what we can do with that. We also wanted to invite in as a speaker or a guest two of individuals. One would be the PED Deputy Secretary, Allison Barencio, and she's works with identity, equity, and transformation. We are going to invite her into one of our future meetings. We also are going to invite in the PED secretary, or excuse me, we're going to ask the PED the status of the Native American and the Spanish Education Act so that we can start getting some language and some information on that as well. Let's see. I know I think I'd already said this. We're going to ask Senator Lopez to present us with the bill and the amended documents that she has at this time. Our next meeting is going to be on the 17th, and that'll be at 8:30. So we will be meeting next week, and that will be our second meeting.
Thank you, Tammy. Are there any questions of Tammy about the Education Subcommittee?
I have one.
Yes.
Madam Chair. You mentioned on the 7th, can you hear me? Yes, okay. Just checking. You mentioned 8:30, is that, and of course that's 8:30 in the morning, correct?
Yes, 8:30 in the morning.
Okay. And since the committee is meeting virtually, will you send me a link or something, of course, so that, of course, that I can participate and do my presentation and whatever else is needed to happen?
I see Tammy shaking her head, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
It's Mikkel, and I was just going to ask, these subcommittees, are they going to be posted on YouTube as well? The meetings for the subcommittees, so that we can watch them?
That's a good question, Mikkel. Amy, do you have an answer for that?
So we haven't got permission, and we want to make sure that we get permission from everyone first. But I think that would be great, and I'm pretty sure that they would as well. So in the next subcommittee, I will ask them if they're okay with that, and I'll send out the link to those as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for asking that. Joanna, I see your hand up. No? Okay. And Mr. Cotton.
Is my hand up? I should take it down. I never took it down.
I didn't take mine down either, so I'll do that now as well. Thank you. Okay, we will have the report out from the Public Safety and Law Enforcement Subcommittee.
I believe that would be me. Everyone can hear me okay? Great. So Public Safety and Law Enforcement Committee also, I need to hear my voice or else I'm going to miss something. We met last Thursday as well. Right now, the members are compiling feedback for the main committee, and our chair is working on getting that all together by the end of this week. So we're working on that for the full council. And for the subcommittee individually, we're looking at short-term and long-term goals and suggestions for legislation, bills, and state and local agency like policy, procedural recommendations, and things that can be implemented that way. We are going to be meeting with Department of Homeland Security at our next meeting. And we're going to have Mr. Kelly Hamilton, who is a 1033 Act representative, kind of come in and go over that and bring a presentation and ask questions to our subcommittee. And we are looking to hopefully also book Miss Kelly Alzhanara with Department of Public Safety to come in and talk to us a little bit about what training looks like at the statutory level, what kind of requirements exist in that way. as well as looking for any statute-related requirements with education requirements for law enforcement. And we're going to be requesting a list as well. And she did give me a call back right before we jumped on this meeting, so I will connect with her tomorrow to probably get her booked. Around the 1st of October would be the following meeting for our subcommittee. And that is what we're working on, trying to pull in those resources and data and people who can kind of give us an understanding and a visual of what law enforcement requirements and training education looks like right now. And our next meeting is also the 17th, next Thursday at noon. So if anyone is interested in having me add them to the invite, please just let me know.
Mary Lou, can you move in Alan Sanchez into our panelists?
Thanks.
And Don Begay.
Thank you, Shani. Are there any questions for Shani regarding the Public Safety and Law Enforcement Subcommittee at this time?
My hand is up now, so.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. What was that date again? What time Thursday for your next meeting?
It will be set. Oh, go ahead, Sergey. Sorry.
Sorry, I got it. Yes, sir. At noon on next Thursday, the 17th.
Okay. And I like everything you've said so far. That's a powerful subcommittee that you're setting on. Everything that you said are definitely things that we need to be looking at. Training, law enforcement, policies, statutes, state statutes that are there that may be weakened, that we need to strengthen and maybe even change the wording of some of them. So I would like to, I think I'm available next Thursday. I would like an invite just to listen in on you guys' conversation.
Yes.
That's a good committee. That's a good subcommittee. It's well needed now, and with everything that keeps going on around this country, we need to act fast. Thank you.
I will add you, Mr. Cotton, as well as Bishop Cooper. I sent a message, so I will get you to add into that invite for next week.
Thank you.
Marion, did I see your hand? You're muted. We can't hear you.
So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I apologize for that. So I was just wondering if this is the same focusing on criminal justice around the expansion of privatized prison and detention center.
You cut out on my end, so I didn't hear the fullness of your question. I think it had something to do with privatized prisons.
Prisons and detention centers. Is it that same committee? If so,
I did not catch that entirely.
The Law Enforcement and Public Safety Subcommittee did talk about the need to also look at privatized detention facilities and prisons. And so I think Marion was saying that they'd be interested in participating in that subcommittee if so.
Okay.
Sorry if we didn't catch that correctly.
And I did see another comment in the chat about you may wish to review the Law Enforcement Academy Board and their oversight of training of police. I believe that Ms. Kelly Alzhanara is the person in charge of that. So when I do connect with her, me and Amy went over that earlier. I believe she is the one in tasked with that. Is that correct, Amy?
Yes, She's the director of the New Mexico Law Enforcement Academy, which does all of the training.
I see Councilor Bencomo. Do you have your hand raised?
I did, thank you. Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for your report, Max. You said the Department of Homeland Security. I meant it's the State Department of Homeland Security, right? And I've just always been really curious about it. I don't know much about it. Obviously, I'm very familiar with the other Department of Homeland Security, and I'm curious about their connection and sharing of resources or anything like that. And if I'm wondering if what the frame of that conversation will be like.
So tell me if my answer helps. Mr. Kelly Hamilton is with the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management for the state. And that discussion that will happen, he's supposed to present next week, the 17th. That will be mainly around the 1033 Act. So that won't be the training discussion and statutory requirements. That's a separate one that will probably come more towards October 1st. Did I answer that?
Yes, thank you.
And Stephen.
Madam Chair, just as a procedural question, are the subcommittees going to report to the main committee for short-term, long-term goals, and then are those going to be approved, or do they just approve them at third level, reference the legislative session, and us moving forward on that?
We are going to talk about that as a part of our process in today's meeting. The subcommittees, I think we will be working together to determine what the subcommittees, who the subcommittees are meeting with, and the information that they are gathering. And they will be making those recommendations to the central committee, which will and can be discussed and decided upon for our short-term actions, as well as the administrative actions and longer-term planning. Thank you. Robert?
Hi, everybody. Along with the discussion about cultural sensitivity for law enforcement organizations dealing with issues of prevention and education, I'm curious if you're also going to look at sort of the other side of the coin, having to do with deterrence. And that is expressed in hate crime law. New Mexico has a very weak hate crime law from 2007. There is an alliance of some organizations, NAACP, Jewish Federation, Chinese American Association, that's beginning to work with some legislators about a hate crimes enhancement bill. And I'm wondering if you will be interested in looking at that side of the coin, along with helping to bring to fruition the domestic terrorism bill, which almost made it to a final vote of the Senate in the last session, but they ran out of time. So I'm wondering if there's going to be attention to sort of both sides of that equation.
That's a great question. I think also room to discuss that as we make priorities from the Central Committee around the conversations and guests that we want to invite in to present to us around for deeper discussion. And so I think we can hold those for both consideration of the subcommittee or whether that becomes a priority here.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi Lenny, can I ask
Mary
what
Lou,
the second piece of legislation you said was?
Yes,
I thought it was legislation.
It's a domestic terrorism bill. I think it was Bill 265 in the last session. House Bill 265. It was sponsored by Bill Ream and Day Vigil, Hockman Vigil. And it was a domestic terrorism bill identifying domestic terrorism in New Mexico law as a very specific hate crime.
Mary Lou, can you bring Kimberly York into the panelists, please?
Any other questions or comments regarding the Public Safety and Law Enforcement Subcommittee at this time? Okay, we will now move on to the subcommittee report out for health.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Kaylee. I didn't get to introduce myself last time, but I'm going to be helping staff the health subcommittee. Can you all hear me all right? Yeah, great.
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. I had issues last time, so just making sure. So at our meeting last Thursday, the chair for the health subcommittee is going to be Dr. Hussein bin Bilal, and he is also in the attendees meeting along with a lot of the health subcommittee people. So we had a pretty robust discussion. The priority areas identified by the health subcommittee are still in the process of being categorized into long-term and short-term goals. But the big bucket areas that were discussed and the subcommittee would like to examine are Medicaid, gross receipt tax, Medicaid buy-in, 1115 waivers, prisons in regards to how healthcare is provided, UNM hospital, looking at the transparency and accountability there, an evaluation of the health, the workforce in regards to health in the state, behavioral health, and land grant to permanently fund early childhood education. So these are some of the big areas that the subcommittee is interested in looking at. For next week's meeting, we have invited the Department of Workforce Solutions Cabinet Secretary Bill McCamley, so he will be presenting, and we are still researching other people to present in future meetings. Our next meeting will be held next Thursday, September 17th from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we'll stay on a constant schedule every other Thursday at the same time. So same, if anybody would like to join these meetings, please let us know. Let me know and I can send you the invite. And I think that's all we have. If there's more specific questions for some of these, maybe we can direct it to the chair. That's what I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaylee. Any questions of the work of the health subcommittees at this time? I see comments in the chat about wanting to be on the invite.
Yes, I see that. I will send an invite to you, Marianne. If you send me your email, please.
Thank you.
I think what would probably work best is that when the agenda for the subcommittees is finalized, what we'll do is we will send the main committee the agenda for each of those meetings along with the link for you to enter. That way you know who's going to be presenting, what we're going to be discussing, and that you can choose to drop in if you like.
I think that's a great idea. I see the thumbs up. Thank you. Great. So as Tammy, Shani, and Kaylee all stated, the subcommittees all chose to also meet every other week on the week that we are not meeting as a central committee. And so that will provide some space for feedback loop and for report outs. We will get more into the function of the subcommittees and the central committee in just a bit. I also wanted to report out that the Civil Rights Commission, which is tasked with the review and research around qualified immunity, did also meet last Thursday. So it was a full Thursday of racial justice conversations in our state. And so they did meet bi-weekly, or how often they're meeting at this time. I don't know if Amy or anyone else knows, but they are also meeting.
I'm not sure, but we will find out and we'll make sure that you all have that information as well.
Yeah, their meetings are webcast on the New Mexico Legislature website, and at some point we may decide that we would ask or invite someone to report out from their commission and share with us here. So that is also an option. So we're going to move into discussion around this council have a conversation about community ground rules and community agreements, and then looking at the goals and function of how we will exist. And so I'll open this by asking, us to think about and setting the intention around what can this group uniquely accomplish. One of the things we wanted to start with is talking about the setting of the agenda and how we move things on the agenda, how we prioritize things on the agenda for this committee, for this council versus the subcommittees are going to be reviewing and discussing. And so requests for items to be placed on the agenda can all be submitted to Amy. We want to create spaciousness to have ideas expressed and for everyone to have the opportunity to say what they want to prioritize and discuss. And we also want enough structure to synthesize those ideas into action. So that's one of the hope for today, is that by the end of today's meeting, we have a few items that we can actually begin moving action on, inviting guest speakers in to hear from, to gain more information about those issues that we care about. We also want to think about time and access for all of our council members. And so if I'd like to ask that as firmly as possible, we have agenda items into Amy 5 business days before our meeting, which actually puts us 1 week out in calendar days. That way Amy has time, and those working with Amy, they have time to gather the information that's needed to set our agenda and provide the information for us to be able to do our work as a council. Does that seem agreeable? Great. Any comments or questions regarding that? The next thing to consideration, yeah, sorry, go right ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask then if there was a time period if we need to review documents, if we can get them sort of a bit in advance, or a couple of days, or just to give us enough time.
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. I think there was question of like the reasonableness of that, and so I'll just ask, does the Monday prior to a Wednesday meeting feel like enough time, or would you need more? Great, thank you all. Next question, and this did come, oh, Kaylee, were you gonna say something?
No, sorry.
Okay. The next question, and this did come up in our first meeting as well, is around how will meetings be run and decisions be made? I think because of the work that we all do, and because of the nature of this council looking at institutional and systematic racism and oppression, that coming from a community building and consensus decision-making model seems like the appropriate approach. And that way we have time for discussion of ideas and interrogation and questioning of why things are coming up, to build that community so that it can then come out from a consensus from this group. Does that sound agreeable? Thank you. Any questions, comments so far? Amy gave an intro to this at the very beginning of the meeting, and I'm gonna practice and work on this. We wanna make sure that everyone has an opportunity to share what's coming up for them and contribute to the discussion. And so as much as possible, we would like to use the raise hand function under the participants list. I'll be scanning that, and Amy is helping watch that so that we make sure that anybody that wants to contribute to this discussion has that equal opportunity to do that. If there are any other functions that we can utilize that you feel like would make this space more accessible for everyone, we can also discuss that as well. Yes, Fatima, I see your comment, the understanding that other things could come through, right? Thank you for that. So the question of how we will interact with subcommittees. We want to have regular report outs. I felt like this week it was really important for us to know that the subcommittees have started meeting. They had really engaging discussions last week, and really started to think about some of the things that were on that greater list that we shared last week, as well as expand well beyond that, as you heard from some of this, the report outs today. And so I think now is a good time to have a discussion about how we would like to work with the subcommittees, recognizing we are all essentially one big committee. We're all going to, in the end, produce one product or one form of recommendations together. And so I think it's a really unique opportunity that we have three subcommittees also meeting bi-weekly at the same time where we're meeting bi-weekly. That gives room for quite a bit of work to happen if we prioritize what each committee is doing. And so I'll open the floor for discussion around if there are ideas about how you would like to see that function, if there are things that you absolutely want any of the three committees to think about exploring, or if there are things that you really want the central committee to first take on. Anyone have any comments, suggestions, or discussion around that? Mr. Cotton.
Yes, just a question here. So as we're listening in on the subcommittees, if we had any questions or maybe suggestions, who would we send those to? Yourself or Amy to get to them, so we're not interfering with what they're doing, unless we could submit a question to them. Which is the best practice that you think we should do?
I'll let Amy and Shani and Kaylee and Tammy respond to that.
So our subcommittees meet on Zoom, and we don't have the fancy of this WebEx to have the audience versus the panelists. So when you join us, will be visual to us and we will hear you. And so, just be respectful, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. So you can put things in the chat, or you can direct it to the chair, or any way that you wish.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for that question. Any other comments or discussion around the function of the subcommittees and the central committee? Austin?
So I still think that there's some discussion to be had around a few things. So, like, number one, I think we probably need to level set on what our goals are and shared values type stuff. That's always helpful to do for any group that aims to work together. Just to make sure that we all know where one another is coming from, what the overall goal is. This is sort of almost like a strategic goal type thing, whereas I think that we're almost at the vision level for a committee like this. And ideally, all of us, I think we want to be effective in creating greater racial equity. I would say that that is probably a pretty decent goal to have, but for us to outline that for ourselves is going to be important. Number one. And number two, you know, I still think there's some misunderstanding about like where are we stepping on toes as we try to move forward with work in conflicting with the subcommittees. You know, I think that we have ideas like, and it was brought up last meeting, sort of the, you know, racism as a public health crisis. That moved forward on its own, but it's also like, well, where are we stepping on toes, and like, what is the overall intention of the creation of this group? Are we really advisory, or are we almost oversight for the work done by these other committees? What the intention of the creation was, I think I'm curious about.
Thank you, Austin. We are going to move into some of that discussion in just a moment around and priorities here in just a moment. Amy, is there anything else you want to provide around the latter part of Austin's question?
So I think, you know, we kind of had a vision that in the beginning, the main committee would set priorities, and that then the subcommittees would start to do the kind of research and analysis and evaluation to kick information back up. But then I think the way that it ended up happening is that our subcommittees have now started that work prior to the main committee setting those priorities. And so I think one of the things is that the subcommittees have already started thinking about who they would like to hear from and what kind of information they would like to give. And then the main committee then can get these reports from the subcommittee, which then we can share with you what we've learned, what we think is important about that, and then you can decide if you need to meet with those people additionally, or if you can take the suggestions that the subcommittee makes. The way that it's divided is that the main committee will be essentially the decision makers of any suggestions that go forward to the governor, and that the subcommittees you should be relying on the subcommittees as experts in those fields who've been able to really probably use their time to speak with a lot more presenters and be able to look at reports and data in ways that you wouldn't be able to because of the size of your group.
Can we ask if you're not speaking for you to mute? We're getting quite a bit of background noise. Senator Lopez, I see your hand, and then Janine.
Thank you. And Austin, your comments and questions, I think, are kind of in line. And I apologize because I was not able to attend the first, 2/3 of the meeting last time because of another prior committee meeting. But what I was wondering if by chance, and I realized that there is a vision that I think, Amy, you were just mentioning and describing for us. But will there be an opportunity? If this was not discussed already, then I apologize. But a chance kind of for us to look at amongst ourselves too, to have a discussion, kind of that vision as to what we're going to be doing together from each of our different perspectives that we have, so that we have, you know, in training back from nonprofits and such, kind of that vision type of thing that kind of moves us forward. And I don't know if that's what is to be in the plans, if that was part of your discussion at our first meeting, but would also, I think, lend into what maybe Austin was talking about in some of those parameters and kind of laying the base, because that way I would want to make sure that we're all working in conjunction, in unison, between the subcommittees and for the, for, I guess, the main committee, just to making sure that we're all, and I know we are, but I guess I'm a person who likes to see something there that we have written that we can point to for the public, that they can see exactly where and what we are and what we're all about at this point. So I just wanted just to share that and see if maybe that is something also that was discussed last week that I missed. So I apologize if I'm repeating something that you've already done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. No need to apologize, and is what we're going to spend the remainder of this meeting discussing and kind of moving through in just a moment. Janine. You're speaking, we cannot hear you.
Does that work?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay. All right, great. I was saying, at the risk of beating a dead horse, I just want to repeat Austin's questions and comments. But if we are going to get into that, I think we should just go ahead and jump into that conversation, because it was really hard for me to conceptualize how do we make decisions, what model do we make without having that foundation laid. So I think that just to let Senator Lopez know, like, no, we have not discussed any of this, and it would be great if we can spend the remainder of our time delving into those issues.
Thank you. I first wanted to ask if there are any other group agreements that you would like for the group to consider. We want to be mindful, be patient, make space and take space, allowing for all voices to have an opportunity to be heard. And if there are other group agreements that are essential to the work of this council and the community building happening here, we'd like to open the space for that to be discussed at this moment as well.
I think a group agreement and practice that I would like to encourage is having space. I know we've talked a little bit before about the sharing of resources. And so to create a sense of accountability, like in the sharing of resources, to have time at the beginning of our meeting after we provide land acknowledgement and grounding, to have some discussion of any resources that have been shared, whether that's like podcasts, current events. I think today, it was just really helpful to have like our chair kind of open and ground with the recent targeting of like anti-racist trainings. But I think to have space within this, within our committee, to be able to have that reflection time so that we are creating both accountability and like reviewing the resources that have been shared like amongst each other, but then also to create a sense of shared understanding because we're all at different places. We might all be doing this work, but we do it in different ways from the viewpoints of our different communities that we represent. And so I think that there needs to be a continual like flexing of that muscle so that we are responding to just new thoughts and challenging ourselves in the learning, like as a model and way to operate within this ecosystem.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I see in the chat the questions, and Amy responded to that. I've received that question several times as well, as around a shared drive. And there are considerations around security of different shared workspaces. And so that's why at this time we're asking resources to be sent to Amy so then she can share out to all of the different committees. And so that is why you have not seen us create a drive at this time. So we're going to move into talking about setting areas of focus and goals In the announcement from the governor, this advisory group is tasked with counseling the administration and monitoring state institutions, holding them accountable for taking action to end systemic racism and ensure that all persons receive fair and equal treatment and opportunities. We're being asked for short-term actionable suggestions, which can include administrative changes, and to do longer term planning to move suggestions to the governor for long-term goals. And so kind of with that understanding of the intention created by the council, I think this is a really good time to have that conversation about the vision and the goals of this council, and specifically the central committee, and what we would like to see. And so I'm thinking about what has been rising to the top out of this that we've had for folks. Alan?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for repeating what we were appointed to there. I think that's very important to keep in front of us, the task that's asked of us, because we're facing so much need, especially when we see the document that you sent us. The need is great, and we're all coming with that a desire to address that need, but knowing that we're an advisory to the governor. We're not going to write the legislation. We're bringing advice to the governor so that there's actions that the governor can take. And it's all based on what action can the governor take. Now, individually, we have powers, all of us, and we want to use those. But I think being invited here, not to leave things hanging about process. I think we can really now tighten up process when we're talking about where we're going to go with the goals. So knowing that we're advising the governor and that she can do executive orders immediately. Those are things that can happen now in the short term. And then when we see the long term, this is where the collective wisdom of the group can come through and process. We have time to do those things. So I think we're on two tracks. I think we really are on two tracks. The meeting has to have, every time we meet, it's got to have two tracks of what's practical that we all know we can act on, and what's the long term that's going to require more process so that we understand each other's values and get to the shared values that's going to have those long term impacts. Now, what I mean by short term, it doesn't mean it has a short term impact on society. They're just short term that we can accomplish within months. And when we're seeing how fast a meeting goes, I want to emphasize then, let's do a two-track piece, immediately looking at practical, and we see that it keeps rising. All the things on our list takes money, and I think there's some practical things that we can move to, that money that's sitting out there ready for us in addressing social this social justice and this racial justice. So those are things that, because time is of the essence for the legislature and for the governor to put her power behind those, because that's what she can do. I think we need to raise to the level of our goals. When you look at all these, which of these are things that we can have act on within this session that are already primed? The pump has been primed. Some big pieces of legislation take years. When we repealed the death penalty, we introduced it 12 times. When we repealed, when we banned cockfighting, we introduced that 18 times. But there's stuff that the pump has been primed, like Senator Lopez's bill, that are ready to go for this session. And so we need to then, having patience with each other, but also knowing there are practical things that I think all of us can come to consensus faster. And those are the things that we need to push to the top. So I think we see those out there, and I would throw out one that reaches many, many people is the constitutional amendment for early childhood, because these are lands that were seized from Native Americans and others, and populations don't have access to those funds today. There's a quick remedy of making $150, $180 million over 3 years immediately available to our youngest children, which are 80% minorities. So those like an example. Senator Lopez's bill, it's ready to go with her partnering with Javier Martinez. That bill's ready to go. The working family tax credit, that's money in their pocket immediately, that's ready to go. And so if you could help us as the chair, Alexandra, if you could help us have a 2-track and maybe then move us in the first part of the meeting, what's the practical that we can come to consensus quickly, and then where are the other things that we have to have time to work, and we probably need to visit with each other outside of this also, outside of this setting, to help raise the values and come to those agreements where we have far more common ground than not common ground. So I would say with those 3 plus the issue of healthcare, we could immediately have a tax in the state to do that. And there's some proposed in here. Pick the one you want, but we can immediately have a supplemental healthcare provided in this January's session. So with that, I'll stop talking. I know I kind of dominated there. Sorry.
No need for apologies. Thank you, Alan. I think indeed that is what we're being tasked with, and what is being asked of us is to think about some of those shorter term priorities, things that have been worked on in our state. Many of you have devoted years to help inform and work on those bills and things that are pending that may even come up in administrative code. And do some of that longer term planning, goal setting, visioning, and prioritizing. And I'll say certainly Senator Lopez's institutional racism bill is a piece of legislation that also was discussed at all 3 subcommittees. And so I think that there is an ability to move to some of that prioritization for that specific ask around the short-term actionable items. Kimberly. I hear you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for that previous comment. I wanted to just kind of piggyback off of that just a little bit with regards to like pragmatic steps and actions that we can take. I have a very specific focus of wanting to make sure that all of this work can trickle down to the nonprofit sector. As a nonprofit consultant, I've been doing a lot of work down here in Cruces, and the number one question that I have been being asked is, will we get some set of uniform policies and procedures that can benefit us that have, really, really small budgets, but are doing significant work in communities with populations that really, really are being impacted by racism and discrimination types of things. And so the focus of my doctoral research is industrial and organizational psychology. And so I just wondered, I do apologize that I wasn't at the last meeting, but I wondered if there had been any conversation about how, I know that we're kind of tasked with looking at state institutions, and some of, those institutions are nonprofits, about kind of like what the Senator Lopez was saying about, the vision and that kind of stuff. If there's been any conversation about how some of that might be able to trickle, some of the work that we're doing might be able to trickle down to nonprofits as well.
Thank you for that question. I envision this space as one where all of the big ideas come up and we get to discuss and explore those answers. Senator Lopez, did you raise your hand again? And then I see Dawn, Janine, and Councilor Bencomo. We'll go to Dawn.
Hi, excuse me. Hi. Yeah. So if we're looking about monitoring and holding state institutions accountable, I kind of really want to think about how do we normalize, organize, and operationalize what this council is doing so that it's actually going to be sustained and be a part of the system. And so rather than just the council, be an actual part of the state government itself. And so I think part of that is we're kind of looking is how is this going to extend beyond the governor's term? Is it going to have longevity? And then how is this council going to hold institutions accountable? If it's only through recommendations and advising, then that doesn't really have a lot of like teeth in a sense to if we notice that different departments are doing things that are creating racial inequities, how much authority do we have to counter that or oversee that? And so I really think some of the conversations I would like to have is kind of just, can we do this through, creating a entity within the department that's greater than just the council, that actually is going to be a part of the government institution itself. And so I think that is going to be one of the key things to kind of have conversations and connection between the different departments, and then really identify like ongoing conversation, and then also include people that are already within the state system or be a part of it. So I just wanted to note that is maybe one of the areas that we can look at is systems change, culture change, and it can't just be, that can't be accomplished within just a couple of months. Yes, I think it's important to be issues focused, and yes, I think it's important, but there needs to be a balance between, like we mentioned before, short-term and long-term commitments or goals and things like that. And so that's my key piece, is really evaluating the systems piece in it.
Thank you. Councillor Bencomo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you mentioned one name before me, or maybe their hand was. Thank you.
I apologize. It doesn't tell me who raised their hand first. So.
Oh, okay. I had thought Janine, you had said her first.
I see you trying to unmute, but we can't hear you.
Okay, did that work?
Yes, it did.
Yes, so I also understand the need to be pragmatic, and I think in order to facilitate that, we're going to need some sort of working space. So I'd like to know more about what the security issues our concerns are around creating a shared folder. Because a lot of these bills I've heard of, some of them I haven't, and being able to actually review them would give us more of a footing to understand what can we contribute as advisors are in terms of recommendations for those more practical or pragmatic short-term solutions. But I also agree with what Dawn's saying. I'm here for systems change, and so far I have not really heard a lot of that being a part of the original visioning. And I think that that's, if there's other people who are invested in that, like this is an opportunity to make this council our own and make it effective in the ways that our communities need it to be effective, and so I at first I was kind of worried because like prioritizing legislation that's going through and supporting and upholding work that has been done over the years, that's already what I do. It's already what I know a lot of people on this call do already. I was really interested in having the conversation about how do we make this a vehicle for systems change, for filling in those gaps in different efforts, for breaking past silos, so that we could create a more collaborative process for co-creating the type of change that our communities need in this state. And I think that having a shared space is going to, like, regardless of security issues, is going to be one of those things that we have to do. I mean, I'm part of a lot of policy working groups that work at different levels of government, and we've never had problems creating a shared Google Doc to share resources, for example. So I think that to make us effective and to move this forward, I really want to be able to access these resources and not have to mine through my emails to see what was sent when in one place, so that we can figure out how do we not only support the work that's already being done, but find those critical gaps so that we can carve out our role in building these bridges and addressing what's not being addressed with the things that are already existing.
Thank you, Janine. I think all of us here are interested in systems change and deeply committed to that, and working to move place of being do the both and as I said, to have those two tracks. Amy, I wanted to give you an opportunity if there's any more that you wanted to offer at this time around listservs and sharing documents, the considerations that we have around that.
I'm not real clear on it. I think that if the council wants to create a shared folder that someone else is creating, I don't know that that's a problem. I know it's something I'm looking into. It's something that we want to find for both our subcommittees and our main council, but I haven't figured it out yet. So something we're working on, but that's really all I have as far as information right now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amy. And we've heard like it's a shared ask and recommendation from all of the committees. And with the information, that we have and the staff, learning more about what that looks like, we asked for information to be sent to Amy at this time so she can distribute it out, just kind of working through the parameters of what we have right now so that we can start that resource sharing and getting those resources out. Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you. I actually very much echo what Janine had to say. I feel like I would definitely love to hear in the short term more information about the permanent fund build in terms of early childhood education and really some political analysis as to why we think that has not been passed yet, given how many years many organizations have been fighting for that, which to someone like me is sort of a no-brainer. It's like common sense, we're safe. It's like this permanent fund. We call it the rainy day fund, but it's been pouring in New Mexico for decades, and our kids are drowning. And so I would personally, in the short term, love to hear some more of that, like deeper analysis of why some of these things that feel like can provide a huge safety net for some pretty historically marginalized communities that tend to be Black, Indigenous, people of color in New Mexico, why those haven't passed. And so I don't know who has that. I don't know who has that analysis, but I'd love to invite some of those folks in. I bet Representative Javier Martinez would totally have that analysis. So I would love to hear from someone like him, perhaps in the short term, right? But I also have some tension, like Janine was saying, I also have some tension around that taking the majority of our time, given I think the uniqueness of this council, that, the governor, I think, is years ahead of many other states, and the opportunity that this group of people have to really be visionary and forward thinking about some policies. I also have some tension around the majority of our time focusing on things that are already moving, right? There are some policies, I think the senator's bill is great and it's already moving. So what are the additional key, frankly, I think policies that could really make a long-term effect on communities across the state? And I think when I think specifically about racial justice and the moment we're in this year, I really want to lift up that the Movement for Black Lives has incredible resources that I think we should look back to. I think they recently released the Breathe Act, which has some pretty strong federal recommendations that also have, and it also has a lot of state and local recommendations that I think we should, perhaps think about having one of our meetings have a serious deep dive onto what some of those look like, because again, I don't necessarily think we have to reinvent any wheels for sure, but I definitely feel like we have a huge opportunity to have some conversations that are not being had at all. And 2 weeks ago, somebody mentioned about, can we do some political analysis trainings and things like that? I would love to hear from those folks what they had imagined, because I thought that was an excellent idea. I, for one, would love to deep dive, maybe not in the weeds, but I would definitely love to understand better how the budget works in New Mexico. I deeply believe that budgets are moral documents that actually tell the public what we invest in is what we deeply care about, right, with our dollars. And so what is the state of New Mexico investing in? What does it value? Who does it care about? And I think there we would find some serious institutional issues that we could address. And so for me, at least in this area of political education and some analysis, I would love to hear about the money and where the money goes and where it has gone historically and where it could potentially move, how it could potentially move in a different direction. So yes, I think it's super critical that we do some deep analysis on things that are moving quickly for the legislative session, but definitely make more time for that longer term visioning conversation.
Thank you. Bishop Cooper.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Taylor, and to the rest of the council. One of my concerns, of course, I believe Alan spoke to it earlier, and we've been talking about what we should address, and we know how long it takes to bring change through the Senate and the House of our state, especially cutting edge ideas that would challenge the racial system, especially around justice. I think it's important that we also advise our governor as it relates to what kind of executive orders that can be put in place that would not be challenged. Well, most of them would be challenged in some way that could help move some things quickly forward. I also am concerned about the fact, of course, that what will happen, and I think somebody talked about this earlier, because since we're advisory council to a Democratic governor, and if there's a new term, is there any strategy behind creating something similar to this in legislation that would be sustainable even after our governor's term is over? She gets appointed to a secretary position in DC. If Biden becomes the president, have we had conversations with our lieutenant governor? What is the process and how do we maintain, because that's 3 months away. So if some of our objectives are going to take us 6 months to a year to get done, they may need to be done by executive order. And that also that within the agencies themselves of the state, she could make some executive orders in relationship to racial justice that I think should be implemented. And I think we need to kind of deal with that about what we can do inside of the state agencies themselves. A lot of time we're talking about the public sector or the private sector, but we're not talking about state government itself. And she has direct oversight, and the people that runs those agencies have direct oversight over those areas. Thank you.
Fatima.
I had one question, which was just following the last meeting. I think one of the requests had been that we, see all of the items that had been proposed, review them, and then try to kind of come back to Amy and Alexandria with more sort of insight from each of our perspectives or priorities. And I just wondered, from all that feedback, was there, just in terms of that process piece, was there overlap? Just in that pre-work that we all did, were there some areas that did surface, assuming that happened, right? So that is one question, just in the way of winnowing and trying to figure out as a group really how to land on priorities, and just the process we did sort of talk about in the last meeting. So that's a question. And then I just wanted to echo what Joanna said and others, but specifically this idea that if there are things that are already in process, just being aware of what our priorities are, and if they are in process, do we want to really focus on that, or is it relatively easy to, based on the input from the subcommittees and their expertise, to endorse things and then keep it moving on things that are more intractable, that we need to devise some maybe power analysis or really figure out how to advocate for those things? So if there are things like the governor in the last meeting said, well, declaring public health, declaring racism a public health emergency is not hard, right? So things like that, if like Alan said, if there are things that folks have been working on that we can, with the presentation or with expertise from others, put our weight behind, but then what are the things that are a lot more challenging that we really do need to talk about? And then I wondered if there was overlap based off of our kind of homework.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, and really what the last three people have said. I think that is part of this process, is that there were things that came from that additional ask. The three things that continue to come up are the institutional racism bill, the declaration of racism as a public health crisis, and there was one other. Oh, yes, the land trust bill. And I think part of this process is getting these ideas out there so we can have that discussion and prioritize. These are the things that are already moving forward. What do we as a council need to do, whether it's a presentation or make the decision to say we support these, and then do we need to have a facilitated conversation to kind of help us do some of that storming and norming, envisioning, and longer range planning? I think, Bishop Cooper, what you brought up is something that also was brought up in other meetings around, is it a long-term goal to kind of institutionalize this council in statute, or some form of a council focused on racial justice in statute? Or is it actually not such a long-term goal? It's actually something that should be addressed in the short term. And so I think these are all part of raising these things as what rises to the top as our priorities at this moment, and then continuing to move forward in how we get to the place of doing some of that mapping and analysis for the longer range. Terrence, I believe.
Can you hear me? I don't know if my mic's on. Yeah, racial injustice is not a short-term fix. It's something that's instituted should be permanent from here on out. One of the things I do want to know is what our subcommittees are doing. Johanna mentioned Black Lives Matter they have acts out there. Why don't we adopt them and be progressive? I think that's the issue now. We're kind of trying to figure out what's going on. Let's just take something and go with it. I think, right now we're in a heightened tension we're in a heightened atmosphere. And me personally, I'll be honest with you, right now, I want to figure out what we're going to do with law enforcement, how we're going to educate them, how we're going to get help out on the streets with mental health patients, how we're going to make sure that we can combat that. Those are some things I think we could probably help out quicker, but that's my opinion. I think that's what we should kind of focus on, figure out what a subcommittee that is doing law enforcement, get together with them and move forward with that quickly. Because personally, yeah, I'm taking it personal that we're losing people right and left for no reason, getting shot in the back for no reason. So I think we need to be progressive, not reactionary. Be progressive, set something up so that it doesn't happen here in New Mexico. It happened to Kenosha, it can happen anywhere. So I think we need to, as the central committee, kind of put our foot down and really put the direction to where we want to see things happen. And even with our subcommittee, if they're coming up with things, we can kind of direct them and say, this is what we're actually looking for. Help us get to where we need to be. That's my opinion, and that's it for me. Any questions?
Thank you, Terrence. And that was the original idea, was that the central committee comes up with priorities that can then kind of direct the subcommittees which direction to explore and do more work around. I see Jennifer, your hand.
Sure. I just have a question in terms of how are we, I guess, coming to a consensus? Like, what, I know that you had mentioned this at the last meeting, but what does consensus actually look like for this group? I reviewed that lengthy list, and some of the ideas that we have are, to me, kind of opposing, which that's okay. But so, defunding the police to me is not the same thing as providing more training. And so how does this group come to consensus about ideas that we may not all be comfortable with? And that doesn't mean I'm uncomfortable with the concept of defunding the police. That's not where I personally stand. But I also understand that if we are on opposite sides of the coin here, then how as a central committee are we coming to consensus, and what does that look like? I think that's a really important process that we haven't yet figured out either. So I kind of want to just start thinking about what does that mean and what does that look like? Are we going to push forward things that some of us are uncomfortable with? I personally don't want to do that, but again, like, I don't know what that means for the rest of the group. So kind of figuring out what does that mean for us as a group.
Yeah, I really that, Jennifer. I think that is a conversation that we need, and a question that we need to hold and explore. I think part of seeking consensus versus a majority rule type process is to have the opportunity to work through when we're not all in agreement. And at some point we'll be making proposal-based action. Something will rise to the top, and we'll be making the decision about whether to move forward with it or that. But I think this community building process of being able to hear all sides of the debate and concern and questions about an issue is really central to our work. Yeah. So I don't know if people have put their hand down, so I can't tell if there are any new hands up.
There's no one before me. I just put mine up.
Okay, Mr. Cotton.
Yes. I just want to say, of course, I definitely agree with what Chairman Smith just said, along with Bishop Cooper and Ms. Jennifer. We have to remember, how did we get here? We didn't just get here. What made the governor do this? How did we get to this point? And we got to this point because of injustice around the country and everywhere else. And our governor wanted to make sure that there was a council in place in the state of New Mexico that we could look at some of these injustices, ways to strengthen our laws. And the only way we're going to be able to strengthen our laws is we're going to have to go to the root of how we got here. And I totally agree with Jennifer. These conversations, when we're dealing with racism and we're talking about racism and injustice, they're not nice conversations. They're not pleasant conversations. I don't think we've had a conversation about defunding the police, because that's not one of my preferences. I think we need to strengthen them, we need to train them, and we need to hold them accountable. And I think that's what the governor is expecting us to do. Look at the statutes, look at the laws, and I think they're in each subcommittee, they're going to be able to bring a lot of things that are in place that we can gear our conversations around. How do we move forward? How do we make this work better for New Mexico? We know there are things in place right now, but apparently Either they're not working or they haven't been working the way they should. So we are charged to look into these areas and see how we make it, how we fix this racial justice thing for the state of New Mexico. And that's our charge. That's how we got here. We got here because it was ugly. It was discomfort. It was uncomfortable. It was just ugly, and it's still going on around us, and it's painful. So yes, we are going to have some tough conversations, but we're going to have to go straight to where we need to have the conversations at in order to get something done short term. Some of it's going to take longer, but there are some things that we can get done sooner. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that everybody who had their hand raised has had the opportunity to speak. Alan, is that a new hand raised?
It is.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, I hearing everyone speak, I have a real confidence. You know, the governor has called us together, and whoever chose us to be here, I think has done a good job. And there's a lot of other people that wanted to be here too, that are supporting us, that I run into all the time saying, I really wanted to be on that council. So I think we need to have confidence in each other. And I have confidence in you. I think that we can face these difficult, hard, ugly things. There's ugly things to this that we're going to see. And we'll be energized by the short-term things that we can agree to, you know, and then we're going to agree to disagree sometimes. But we can move along with the two tracks. And so I think at the end of each meeting, you as the chair recommending, I'm supporting you to be able to say, okay, this issue, like you mentioned a while ago, something's been brought up many, many times. Okay, do we have a consensus that we can be behind this and let's get to the harder stuff? You know, like the Land Grant Permanent Fund, 1910 they created. Women didn't even have the right to vote. And they keep telling me, well, our forefathers were so wise in setting that up. I don't care about the forefathers. I care about the mothers today. And each one of us is coming with that experience. That's why we've been drawn here. You have an experience that right now, I guarantee you, I think we have consensus on a number of things. And we need, and as the chair, you need to be bringing us to those and asking, do we have a consensus on an issue? And if we're all been working the social justice work that we do, we're familiar with this. And yeah, maybe on some issues we'll bring in experts like Javier Martinez or others to talk about these. But we, in our experiences and in your treatment in this state, we know what things we already have consensus on. And so I'm encouraging you as the chair, when you hear these moving forward, ask. And if we don't, then say, okay, send it to the subcommittee. My light went off because of no motion. So ask for those, and then when we don't have consensus, then we keep sending them to the committee. But whatever we can get consensus to, you ask for it, and that's just agreement. That's just agreement. And I bet you we'd get probably at least 10% of that list done within one meeting. But where the hard things come, then yeah, let's dig, let's get in there.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Just taking note of additional hands raised. I think I'm showing Kimberly, Bishop Cooper, Janine, Dawn, and Jacqueline. I don't know which of those are new. Dawn, is that new?
Yes. So this is just going back to House Bill 15 that we were talking about. And so a part of that has where the State Personnel Office, in consultation with the Advisory Council, develop policies and plans basically for the state agencies to report on how they're addressing institutional racism. And so I think one of that could be, we may not even need a piece of policy to begin the work on that, is to actually start creating the tools or the guidelines or templates that we would recommend to state agencies. Like these are some of the guidelines or the template, or like start thinking about how are we going to have state agencies, how are they going to report on that? What type of support can the council provide to these agencies? I think bringing everyone's combined knowledge together and start creating that a series of questions or templates or checklists or things like that, I think would maybe also be a good start, because that's something we could definitely work on. But then it would be, if the bill passes, then it would be mandated, and we already have, something to provide. If not, this is still within the governor's, control, where she can start, requesting that state agencies use this template or these guidelines, preparing for state agencies to submit these reports, or to at least analyze the data, or to look at like a lot of the things that are being requested here. So as one of my proposals is to start, creating that guideline for state agencies, and what they'll need to report, and how this council can work with either the governor's office or the state personnel office to start these discussions. And I mean, that kind of goes towards what we're working on, but it's also something that's already been set in motion. And I think it also will touch multiple sectors and institutions as well.
Thank you, Dawn. Jacqueline?
Yeah, thank you. I, am very much in agreement with an alignment with the priorities that you mentioned, Alexandria, at the beginning in terms of where there was alignment. And I just wanted to amplify one of the priorities that was named on the document that was shared around the renaming of state properties. I think that this is a issue that, to me, can be solved with executive order. I think that there's also the value of creating educational awareness around how the names and the use of colonizer names who have literally played roles in the genocide of Indigenous people from the homeland communities here has been proven in studies to create mental damage and overall the just completely problematic in terms of the well-being of particularly Indigenous youth and overall Indigenous people. And we can see that correlation across when we're looking at BIPOC communities and the impact of colonizers and that racialized spatiality. It is a weapon that continues to be used, and it's very much present here in New Mexico. So I think with both awareness and whether that's executive order or legislation, I think it's really important to be able to make recommendations, to bring in experts to share research that continues to be done around everything from no racist mascots. I live within the city limits of Bernalillo, which is touted as the city of Coronado. Bernalillo Public School has over 40% Native American children who attend school in this, with very much whose logo as a town is the conquistadors' axes that were used against relatives here in these homelands to slaughter us. And I think that that is something that is so coded and overlooked within New Mexico that it's something I really would like to see move forward as something that is very tangible for us to be able to move on as a collective.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I also forgot to add, so Senator Lopez's institutional racism bill, racial impact statements were some committees also talked about. And so just around questions around if there's anything we want to do as a council regarding those issues now. I think the Education Committee is going to do more work and has questions about the institutional racism bill and the other iterations of that. And then thinking about some of these longer range or just deeper conversations, right? Where, Mr. Cotton, you said you don't support the conversation around defunding the police, and recognizing that there are folks here that do. And so thinking about, is that a conversation we want to prioritize for this council to start bringing in folks to have more conversation about that. And that's also included in the invitation for agenda items to be sent to Amy. We can start also putting those issue areas together and identifying, and if you have suggestions for guests that we can invite in. But I think that's what the ask is not just for us to focus on the short term, but also to start naming some of the things and ideas that we want to be able to start actually inviting folks into this space to learn more about, to do some research about, and have information for us to make decisions and create action based from that informed stance. Again, I don't know if these are new. Austin, is your hand up new?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anyone before me, but I'm gonna go ahead and go. So there's a couple of things that I just want to outline. So yes, there are like short-term tactics for how we start to address some of this. And like, this is all from like strategic planning. Like Senator Lopez had said, like, this is just my nonprofit brain working that says like, well, this is part of the strategic plan. And some of what we do is like tactic-based, like let's support legislation that will advance some of our stuff. But the other thing is like, we really do have to be careful and make sure that the way that we're doing stuff is respectful. Very much like I would liken it to the protest that happened in counter to the Oñate statue up at the museum here in Albuquerque became violent, and all of a sudden another source for pain for people because it was not something that was super explicit in the abstract of why people were protesting, that it would become something violent and another source for trauma. So in that, we as an organization had also supported like some of these candidates specifically for their stances on things that we believed would strengthen the everyday lives of Native working families. It is also something that will contribute to this group, but separating those out, that I am not just here on a call saying, yes, let's do what I do for my job every day, and that it would have a separate abstract, I think is very important, in that we're trying to create these long-term systems change, and how do we start to make sure that we're being careful about those, but also, again, proactive. I can't remember who said that we need to be progressive, and we can't wait for those issues to come to New Mexico. We have to be forward thinking about how to address those, and that it probably needs to extend beyond legislation, but also that as far as legislation is concerned, that there should be stuff, and I can't remember who brought it up last time, but that there should be a kind of legislative racial analysis group that is doing the same thing that the FID is doing, or with the FIRs, I can't remember, but that we need to be doing racial impact reports for all that kind of stuff, and that would be some of our long-term impact, and making sure that the way that we're forming these things is inclusive, but also respectful to systems change, acknowledging that some of these systems were intentionally created to keep us out and intentionally still function in ways that disenfranchise us. So we have to think, I think, a little bit more creatively than only policy. We know that that is something that this is focused for, but that as part of long-term goals, we need to think on how to make issues at multiple levels. And I would still agree with the 2 tracks statement, but more so than I think 2 tracks, I think tactic and vision and goal. And that's, I think, for me, what would get me feeling a little bit more optimistic about how we move forward, is that supporting legislation that we all support. And the reason that I voted for the governor was largely because of her stance on early childhood education. It's like, I already cast that vote. So, you know, how do we make this something that is proactive and respectful and honest, and how do we give us that guiding line should all of us have to step off the committee tomorrow. How do we create the framework for other people to pick up the work that we're doing?
Thank you. I think I hear perhaps then you all can let me know if you agree with this idea, but I feel like there's a need for us to have a facilitated conversation specifically around that vision and goal setting that can really get us to that place where folks feel like it's very clear what the longer range work of this council, what the vision for that longer range work of this council is. Does that feel like what's coming up? Not seeing much feedback.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. So I had my hand up. One of the things I think would help us is to identify, and yes to your question, Chair Lady, but one of the things I think that is essentially important is that we just pick we keep on having conversations about what it is that's important to us individually. And we all come from our own social constructs and our own personal, strong, passionate issues as it relates to racial justice. But I believe, like Terrence said and Joseph said, what brought us together in the first place in this particular space was really about police brutality, institutionalized racism as it relates to that. And so I'm very heavy pushing for that. But at the same time, I just think, Madam Chair Lady, with all of the response that you have received, that we can pick one or two or three things and then dedicate one of these 2 hours to one of those issues. And so that way, and then if there's materials, emails, websites, even books that people need to advise themselves of, to study other patterns in other cities, it gives us 2 weeks to do that and then come together, because there's going to be disagreement. Because I believe in partially defunding the police. I work with Black Lives Matter, but I don't believe in closing, as the Breathe Act, all federal prisons. I don't believe in that. Justice as it relates to sentencing and all of that, collective. So I just think that if we're going to do early education, if that's one of our planks, then let that be one of our planks. And then let's get some dedicated time to educating the whole, because all of us are not at the same level as it relates to the various issues, because some of us are experts in one issue, others are have other issues that we're experts in, but I think we can learn from each other. And if we put together a collective, collaborative library of information, and then take on our own personal responsibility to be prepared to have that conversation. But again, institutionalized racism shown through police brutality is just one form of it, but it is what brought us together. It is what caused the whole country to be set on the edge. And for us to ignore it in our city, or in our state rather, I think is a fatal mistake, because those who are protesting, they're not really protesting against early education, but they are protesting against a man getting shot 7 times in the back for no reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. I want to be mindful of our time. I think Janine and Terrence, your hands have been raised again. I also want to say that Amy and those staffing the committees have asked and are working on identifying like all of the bills in our legislature that can in some way address racial justice issues that have not passed for whatever reason, so that we can then move forward with an analysis of that. And so I just wanted to share that as well. Janine? set your hand new?
First off, I just want to thank all our colleagues here for their excellent thoughts and contributions. I really think I love the suggestions in terms of process. I'm really concerned about accountability and follow-up. Fatima brought up that we did make a request to have the full list of possible issue items and their categories sent to us. As far as I understand, that was not done. We also made the request last time to start with land acknowledgement and with the exercise and grounding. I think there was a variation of that, but there was no land acknowledgement when we started, which is also one of those important factors. And I think that as long as we can continue to follow up tightly with the recommendations that are being made, we can progress through these conversations. I really want to uphold Austin's recommendation for both building off of, I think it was Terrence's suggestion for creating a 2-tier agenda into a further 3-tier agenda around tactics, strategy, and long-term vision. And also, I took notes during this meeting, so I want to offer sort of bottom lining some of the key priorities that I heard people repeat over and over again as a way for us to sort of organize our thoughts and our discussions going forward, while maintaining consistency with these issues. And I think we need to have our first conversation about white supremacist culture, because a lot of the ways that we're talking about these issues and sort of low-hanging fruit as well as long-term vision, to me, can and do often represent Band-Aid solutions to systemic issues. Unless we can name and talk about and have a shared language around white supremacist culture being the core issue undergirding the structural inequalities that all of our communities are dealing with, I think it's going to be hard to maintain that focus on systems change and the actions that can be meaningful towards working towards that. And so that's all.
Thank you, Janine. And then Terrence, I want to make sure if your hand is new.
Okay, yeah, it is. Bishop Cooper hit it spot on. We have to really look task at hand what we were formed for. If the police subcommittee is doing qualified immunity, why don't we do educating our officers? One of the things that we all got to understand, yes, is a deep-rooted systemic racial issue that we're dealing with. But we also got to understand this: if Blacks, African Americans, however you want to put it, are not equal, and we keep getting killed off, who's next? Who's next? So we need to bring that up to where we're all on the same playing field and address these issues. It's a conversation. It's going to be a tough conversation. We won't have a lot of people that want to talk about it, but I think we should start there and move forward. That's my suggestion. Bishop Cooper talked about it, and I think kind of we should move along the lines that we were formed for. Yes, I think Austin made a comment that it's a fire in the bed of a burning house. It's a tough conversation, but you know what? Sometimes we're put together to tackle these hard conversations and these issues. I think we should do it. That's my opinion, and that's it. And I really feel we need to move forward with that.
Thank you, Terrence. So I think we have there's a few things. The Law Enforcement and Public Safety Committee is bringing in DPS at their next meeting next Thursday on the 17th, and the invitation was given at the opening of this meeting at the report outs that if any of us would like to attend that meeting, that is available. So I would like to ask, and I also hear this kind of working on the shorter term priorities and also devoting time at our upcoming meetings for some of this deeper planning and thinking and learning about other issues. And so I'd like to ask if we would like to set the priority for our next meeting, which will be on September 23rd, to really focus that conversation around law enforcement and policing. And then we can narrow down kind of what that conversation, what we want to focus that conversation on. Do we have agreement for that? Is there dissent or more conversation that we would like to have around that?
Can you repeat that one more time? My audio cut out just a little bit.
So thanks, Dawn. Recognizing that the Public Safety and Law Enforcement Subcommittee will be having a representative from DPS at their subcommittee meeting next week, I asked if for our kind of second part of our work, our discussion for our next meeting, if we want to focus that conversation on law enforcement and public safety, whether that's around training, or we can define kind of what parameters we would want to focus on and identify who we want to invite in to speak, and so that we can start having that conversation as a group.
Okay, so the entirety of the next meeting would be focused on enforcement, or is that just like a topic, one of the
That's
topics?
just a topic.
Okay.
Just a topic, so we have space to dive deeper in actual subject matter, on subject matter issues.
Okay, great. This is Dawn. I agree. Yes, for that.
Thanks, Dawn.
Might I add, maybe we can have the subcommittee focusing on this present kind of what their thoughts are, priorities are, what the recommendations are, rather than it just being informative. It's like we ask the subcommittee to suggest what they would want. And so I just worry about having, every 2 weeks without us kind of moving forward on a recommendation, that a lot of the work is happening in the subcommittee level, that next meeting, we have the law enforcement subcommittee present what they want, and then we have a vote or some sort of discussion or action by the end of next meeting.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is the intent, is to start bringing the subcommittees and the central committee and working in that way, receiving the recommendations. Thank you. Shawnee, is your hand new?
Yes, I just put that hand up. I just want to let you guys know that we will be meeting with DPS, but that's solely going to be around that 1033 Act. Not until we meet with Ms. Kelly. I will get it right. We'll get it right. We'll be looking into like the training and requirements, and I haven't actually gotten to have that discussion with her yet to run those 3 priorities by her, which would be looking at what statute looks like for training and what is required in educational like statute requirements, and a list of which police forces have to go through the training in that police force academy that she does run, and which which I don't know the word, which departments don't have to do that. So that conversation probably wouldn't come until the beginning of October, because I had a discussion with our chair, and putting in 2 presenters will be more than what we have time for in our time.
Thank you for that clarification, Shawnee. So I want to reiterate the call for proposed agenda items to be sent to Amy for our next meeting. We will move forward with working on still centering that conversation so that we can begin having the conversation looking at law enforcement, and so that the central committee can come up with questions as well that perhaps we want the subcommittee to be able to clarify when they are meeting with the Secretary of DPS, and also begin to identify who else we want to hear from and speak with, as well as moving forward with looking at some of the proposed legislation that we've identified as being a bit easier or a bit more ready to move forward as a group. And I just want to make sure everybody that has their hand up has had the chance to share the space. Okay. I really appreciate you all. I appreciate your commitment and your service and all that you bring to this. We're growing together. We will get there together, no matter how rocky the start of the process may feel. This is not easy work, but I know that this is a super dedicated and committed group of folks. And so for that, I am grateful. Our next meeting will be September 23rd. And Amy, are there any closing announcements that you have?
I think we will email all of you the agendas for the subcommittees along with the link to that. I did send out that full list on August 27th. And so if any of you did not receive that email, please check again and let me know. Because if you did not receive that email, that means I don't have a correct email address for you. So please make sure that I know a good email address to send things to you, to be able to send links and calendar invites and all of that. Other than that, I don't have anything else unless Kaylee or Shawnee or Tammy have anything.
Nothing for me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much. We look forward to being in touch in the interim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mary Lou. I super appreciate you being on here. Can you save the chat and the recording for me and send it to me so I can put it up?
I am doing that right now, Amy, and then I will schedule the 23rd. I'll work on it first of the week.
That's fine. You know what I think we should do is, because there's so many problems with folks, and I'll email you this, I think we should just go ahead and create the link and send everyone in as an attendee, and then
move them.
Right when we're ready to start, bring them up.
It's weird though, because I put them in as panelists. I don't put anybody in as an attendee. I put them in as panelists, and then we're still moving them all. And I know because I pulled the list out. So it's weird.
No, I think they're not clicking the right buttons. And so I think we should just go ahead and say, let's put everyone in as an attendee, and then we'll just move them up when we get to it.
That's fine.
Yeah, because I mean, I got so many texts. I was like, well, why didn't you click the right button?
Right, I know. I was getting emails from a few people. And Dawn Begay, I could never even get her in as a panelist. It just wouldn't let me. And then she and I were chatting, and she said, I'm going to log out and log back in. And then I was finally able to move her. So again.
That's odd. I wonder what that was. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Technology.
Yes, exactly. And it's been a day of it too. I blame the weather.
There we go. Yes, right. My power was going out all day yesterday, like on and off and on and off. So
yeah,
I'm sure that created problems.
Well, and I guess in Albuquerque, I was hearing that there were all sorts of problems down there with power. So, and across the state, there were issues too. Anyway.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Okay.
Go enjoy your evening. And yeah, I'm saving and I will get to you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Save. Chat.